I would say that especially after COVID, we have seen an enormous amount of need of just understanding that we're all going through something, right? And so the level of situations that come up because of, the amount of mental health needs of just the stress, the burnout, all of those big important pieces that come along with running a nonprofit organization show up in ways that bring major challenges.
Welcome to the Nonprofit Nook, the podcast for nonprofit leaders, board members, and community changemakers who want to build stronger, smarter organizations. I'm your host, Wendy Kidd, a longtime business owner and nonprofit leader, and I'm here to bring you real talk, real tools, and real stories to help you thrive in the nonprofit world. I'll be talking with local nonprofit leaders, community changemakers, and experts in everything from board development to fundraising and digital tools, sharing real stories and simple strategies you can actually use. Because running a nonprofit is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nonprofit Nook. Today's guest is Gabriela Norton, founder and CEO of People Performance Resources, also known as PPR. It's a Dallas-based HR consulting firm that helps organizations strengthen culture, leadership, compliance, and employee performance. Gabriela is a strategic human resources expert with extensive experience supporting both businesses and nonprofits through everything from executive coaching and talent management to board governance and organizational development. Known for her people-first approach and deep understanding of mission-driven organizations, Gabriela is passionate about helping nonprofits build healthy workplace cultures that allow their teams and their missions to thrive. Today, we're diving into the unique HR challenges nonprofits face, how leaders can better support their teams, and the practical strategy organizations can implement to create stronger, more sustainable workplaces. Please welcome Gabriela.
It's so great to be with you, Wendy. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Same. I'm so excited you're here. I feel like this is one of those topics that everyone needs to know, but not everyone is willing to have the conversation. So I'm super stoked. I think today's going to be fun.
Thank you. Likewise. And you're right. I mean, I think sometimes we try to stay away from the people topics, but they're so critical to nonprofits. So I'm excited to be with you.
They really are. And I feel like nonprofits try to stay away from it because they don't want to feel too corporate. But I feel like if they understood it better, they would understand that a lot of it is to not make it feel corporate. It's to make it a great culture. So I think today's good. So let's just jump in. Let's start with the big picture. When you're working with nonprofits, what are some of the HR issues that pop up over and over again?
Well,
classic.
You just mentioned one, right? That these are mission-driven organizations that want to create an environment and a culture where mission is key. And I totally agree with that. I also know, and there's a number of times when I have stepped up and spoken on behalf of nonprofit clients who, for whatever reason, there is this negative connotation that nonprofits are these little business, little entities over here that anybody can run. But the reality is that these are very complex business that deserve to know best practices, that need to speak about what is going on from a people standpoint, and who are better served if they are empowered to know how to navigate through those complexities. Because it's not really if there's a people issue that comes up, is when. We're people, we're imperfect human beings interacting with each other, trying to put our best foot forward. And despite best efforts, at times things don't go as planned, right? And so I think that some of the most common areas where I see is that nonprofit organizations may not necessarily be equipped on how to deal with the people matters effectively, transparently, so that everyone can understand what is the expectation and hopefully move towards solution. So some of the areas in which we have supported clients in the nonprofit space is to create some structure and best practices around how to manage through those complexities. We often find clients who are, pretty small, and they may not necessarily have some structure around the HR function. So, for example, many have, a lot of people are wearing different hats, and they're doing the best that they can to deliver on their mission. So stopping and creating let's say, a performance management process, for example, even if they're small, it opens the opportunity to have good, transparent dialogue around what is expected of the role, how things are going on a constant basis, having frequent conversations around that performance, addressing what's going on well, and then also addressing when things are not going well, so that there is a sense of understanding about what that employee has been giving in terms of opportunity and in terms of challenge for growth, and ultimately to have a dialogue and a process in which, if for some reason the employee is not necessarily taking on that opportunity, that they have a good documented process if for some reason this person doesn't work out and they need to make a termination. Because even though they may be small organizations, they still have liability that when someone leaves, they could go and file a claim against them, which is unfortunate, and the courts may rule on the side of the employee unless the employer has a good level of documentation as to why that termination, took place in the first place.
So true. And I feel like that's kind of the biggest problems that I hear from nonprofits as well, is they have no real expectations set. They may or may not have had a job description when that employee was hired. So there's nothing there to kind of hold them accountable. They also don't really want to hold people accountable because it makes them uncomfortable, right? They're afraid of conflict. So they're afraid of holding them accountable, which also prevents them from giving good feedback too. Mm-hmm. And then, we don't hear from them until there's a problem. And now they want to get rid of somebody because they did something horribly wrong in their eyes, but the employee just never even knew. So where do we go from here? Mm-hmm. So, I think knowing all that, this is going to be natural for you. What are some of the standard practices you wish nonprofits knew and put in place at the beginning?
Yes. So, the job description is really critical. Not only is set the roadmap for the employee to understand the expectations of the role, but also it becomes an area where if something doesn't go as planned, an employer, a nonprofit organization can refer back to say, hey, we talked about this. This is what we agreed that the role will entail. We really like to introduce our clients to what we call the 90 days expectations document. And we, in essence, marry the job description with the essential behaviors that a person needs to have for that particular organization and mission. So the way that it looks like is when someone is hired, we take that job description and we create what is expected to be achieved in the first 30 days. And that is combined with, I don't like to call it soft skills, but the essential skills that a person must have, such as teamwork and dependability and accountability and things that need to be showcased pretty quickly once a person comes on board, and those areas can be sustained. So we break that down between 30, 60, and 90 days. And this is a document that in essence begins the performance management process, because the employee will then stop with their manager at 30 days and say, how are things going? Are these areas being fulfilled? Is there coaching that needs to happen so that we can begin building that sense of confidence and understanding of expectations? So it's really a two-way street. We also give the employee the opportunity to weigh in on how they feel things are going. So 30, 60, 90, they stop, they connect, they talk about it. It is documented what is going well, what it may not be going well, so that we don't get to 90 days and suddenly the employee says, I never knew that you expected that from me, or vice versa. Well, employee, we told you this, and we're not getting the results that we need. And so all of this is documented well before 90 days. If something is not going well, the manager will know that the expectations are not being met. And so I'm of the mentality, and this is not something I created, but I definitely agree with the mindset of hiring slow and firing fast. Because within the 90 days, you will have ample opportunity to know if the essential behaviors are there, if there's something that you can continue to train, or if this is simply not a match from a really a character standpoint, right? And so you now have this
Right.
document that can support whatever decisions may need to take place beyond the 90 days.
I love that. That's something I've always done in my company is the 30, 60, 90 days. And I want to say this to everybody out there. These do not have to be hardcore, crazy goals. These need to be basic things. Think of it as like a checklist. You know, what have they accomplished in their 30 days? What do you need to know that they've done? What trainings have they had to attend? It can be as simple as, have they observed as many shifts as they're supposed to observe? Have they attended as many trainings? Have they shadowed as many people? What are the basic things that they are going to have to do as an employee in that first 30 days to be set up for success? And I also want to say, and you tell me what you think about this, Gabriela, but I think a lot of times people get hired in and it's like, oh, I don't know what I need, but I need somebody in here. And they hire somebody that they think will be great, but they don't really have a formal job description yet. It's okay to write that job description later. Mm-hmm. It's okay to say, okay, we've let this go on too far. Now I need to write down what their role is and get some clarification here. So we're all on the same page and we can make sure that we've defined the role. We've given it 30 days. We've given it 60 days. We now can kind of get a better feel for what this job is, and now we can document it. Don't you think?
I love that point, Wendy. In fact, I think it's very valuable and empowering when a manager can go to the employee to say, here is my draft of the job description. What are your thoughts? Or even vice versa. Like if the manager is going so crazy with everything going on, they don't have a job description, but there's a creation of this simple checklist. And by the way, our form is just checklists. It's like the bullet points of the main things in the 30, 60, 90. We take that and, we have seen scenarios where the manager says, here are the main expectations of the role. Please help me with the first draft of your job description based on this and what you now have hands-on experience with. And create the first draft. I'm going to then weigh in with my final thoughts, and we're going to have this finalized working document that we're going to review every year, right? And so it can be as simple as that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. And guys, just seriously, it can happen at any point in this engagement. When you've got an employee, you can change things up. That's the beauty of it, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be super formal. But I do think there's a point where you do have to get a little bit more formal, and you have to do things like an employee handbook. Like I'm a handbook lover. I don't know what to tell you. I'm just a nerd about employee handbooks. I think it's such a great tool for setting expectations for culture, not just how much PTO do you get, right? Mm-hmm. So when do you feel like they need to start formalizing things like that? They need to have formal HR policies. They need to have an employee handbook. They need to have whatever forms they're going to have people use for different things. What kind of is the trigger point for that for a nonprofit?
So some folks like to wait until they're bigger in employee count. And in my opinion, the moment that you hire more than 2 employees, I would say probably the sweet spot is at least to have some policies. When you have 5 employees, it's a good idea, because now you have people who are depending on your guidance on what is the organization going to expect from me from a policy standpoint. And it doesn't have to be a 26-page document, right? Especially for a small growing organization. Again, some very key policies that will be applicable to this smaller size will be important. And in addition to, a lot of clients may say, we don't even have benefits, so I don't need an employee handbook. Well, that's really a total.
I hear that all the time.
Yes. So, in fact,
Yes.
I say, well, even when you have benefits, you don't want to spell your benefits in your handbook. You may want to say what you provide in a general sense, but you don't want to obligate yourself to creating something that says, I'm going to pay for, I don't know, 80% of the employee only. All of those details do not need to go there. But to say that, here is where we stand with our harassment policy, with our anti-discrimination policies, all of those areas are important to have in a handbook so that employees feel educated and they have knowledge about what the organization offers to them. And at the same time, the employee handbook can also serve in case a claim is filed against this organization. So it is a defensive mechanism to say, despite our handbook and the policies that have already been established, these policies were broken, right? And so that is another area where the nonprofit, where the organization can defend themselves if something indeed was broken from a policy standpoint.
Absolutely. And this is where you guys, you get your permission to terminate someone. If you have it documented, if this is the way we do things and that person is consistently violating that, how we do things, it needs to be documented. And that's what I think you should keep in mind when you're doing your handbook is you're documenting what you're already doing. You're not starting from scratch. You're not creating a new wheel. Start with the basics. What's the dress code? How do we take days off? What holidays are we closed?
Yes.
Simple little things that you already know, and the two people who've been there with you for 2 years knows, but anybody new needs to know as they come in. Just go ahead and document what you're already doing, and then you can add to it as you go.
Absolutely.
It makes it a lot easier.
Absolutely. And, I think that some of the challenges that we have seen is that clients have a couple of employees and things have gone fantastic. And there's also this position of assumption that we're just going to continue this way, right? And so they add a couple of more employees. And guess what? Suddenly they're not necessarily in the same dynamics that they were before. And this employee, does not necessarily have as much respect to the attendance policy as the other have done in the past.
Right.
So that's why it's important to have, those policies in place. And again, it can be basic, it can be straightforward from what their current practices are, but ultimately to spell out what is, both acceptable and not acceptable from a performance standpoint.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What are some mistakes that you see nonprofit leaders make that you could have prevented with just a little bit of planning?
I would say that the biggest culprit, Wendy, is this thought that I have a really talented individual in my team. This person is a high performer. They have gotten to know the organization very well. They can pretty much, run with authority and with autonomy because they're just that good and they care, overall a great top performer. And so this top performer, as the organization grows, is then promoted to be a manager. But this person has never really given the skills to manage others. And as great and talented as they are, they just simply do not have the right tools to know how to have tough conversations and hold people accountable, which, to your point a while ago, is where that feedback stalls, right? Where people don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings. Brené Brown puts it beautifully. She often says that she analyzes different workplaces and sometimes she says, you have a nice problem, meaning that you are too nice.
Yeah.
You are not addressing the hard conversations. And therefore, I cannot begin to tell you the number of times that I have seen this to become a very toxic environment because someone is not either trained or does not have the right skill set to hold those conversations that are so critical that will course correct someone that needs to improve. And when I see this from a manager standpoint, then I see the CEO realizing, wait a minute, this is going way, way wrong. So then the CEO jumps in to say, we need to course correct, this is going the wrong way. And suddenly the CEO is seen as the bad cop, right? and then the manager
Yeah.
tries to play like, well, the CEO says, and those dynamics can be incredibly toxic. We need to have a unified,
Yes.
mentality around what is expected, what is well received versus not, and those conversations, transparent conversations, while giving opportunity, they also be in cohesion to not throw it like the CEO under the bus and not have this bad cop, good cop. I think that those by far seem to be some of the biggest hurdles that we see within especially the smaller organizations.
Absolutely. And I think that that's a really key point because, usually the first employee is the executive director. And the person who manages the executive director is the chairman of the board, the president of the
Right.
board. I can't tell you how many times I've seen such huge problems between the board and the executive director because the board president never had any training, never had any experience with managing people. So they've never done a review. They've never done any kind of conversation over mistakes that were made or improvements that need to be had. No real feedback on job performance either, and there's no normal feedback. So the executive director is constantly walking on eggshells because they just don't know where they stand. And just getting that little bit of training into the board president's hand is so crucial, and making sure that anyone who comes in as president either has that experience or is willing to go to training for it, because you're managing your top employee, your captain of the ship, right? And then the captain of the ship needs that same training so that they can be able to have good conversations with the president on their own feedback, but then also as they bring in other employees and building the team and establishing that culture and making sure that there is that feedback loop so everyone knows. And, I used to always say, if I'm coming to an employee, they should never be surprised. They should never be surprised that this is happening, because they should have known at some point that there was an issue. We should have had some kind of conversation. It should never be a surprise.
You're so right.
Yeah.
Yes, and we don't say that starts at the top for. Let me say that again. We say that it starts at the top for a good reason, right? And it does.
Yeah.
It's absolutely critical that good leadership, sound leadership is exemplified across the organization. So when the executive director is held to a standard of accountability that is documented, that is understood, that is transparent, then that executive director can easily cascade the same across their organization, so that they can be, really modeling what they're experiencing themselves. So, we work with a lot of boards who come into the role, again, with this mindset of, this is, I can do this with my eyes closed. I run this other organization.
Yeah.
It has much more sophistication, right? And the reality is that these areas are critical. I will also say that there's so many times that we evaluate and we place specific structures for the organization, and then we realize that the executive director does not have a performance review, not even once a year. And so, having ongoing dialogue is really the way in which the performance management process is moving. From a best practice standpoint, is no longer once a year. Even at the very top, we see at least quarterly check-ins, with the executive director. There are evaluating both performance, that are evaluating goals. In some organizations, they engage the feedback from the community and from the team. So there's, all kinds of ways that can be done, and it doesn't have to be complex. For executive directors, a lot of times they say, there's just no way that I can have an ongoing dialogue. I have, this number of employees.
Right.
Time is of the essence. And I push back to say, well, you don't have to create another meeting. You already have set meetings with your employees. So use that one meeting, per week, or maybe every other week, to just ask 3 questions. What are your wins? What are your challenges? And what can I do to support you? And have
Right.
the dialogue so that you are providing that ongoing coaching feedback to the team. And keep a journal so that when you are looking back at, hey, 3 months ago we've been talking about your attendance consistently and you're still showing up late, now you can step into a place of disciplinary with good documentation, but that's the beauty of
Absolutely.
checking on performance on an ongoing basis, because to your very good point, it's always at the service when an employee knows about something at the end of the year and they really had not had an opportunity to to improve or to prove themselves that they can do better.
Absolutely. I think having that continuous feedback loop is so crucial. Just have scheduled check-ins so that it's happy or bad, either one.
That's right.
We're not just meeting when there's a problem.
That's right.
Because that causes a lot of anxiety for people.
Yes.
So we know that nonprofits have small teams and tight budgets, but what are some ways leaders can still create a really healthy workplace culture without a lot of resources we know?
I would say that the most impactful ways to enrich a culture do not cost a thing. It can simply be as meaningful as being a manager that shows up with empathy, a manager that shows up with intention, a manager that listens to understand rather than to respond, and ultimately a manager that acknowledges when things are going well and that provides transparency when things are not. And I would say that those are the fundamental pieces that I see make or break a culture. Because we both know that people do not necessarily leave because they have reached the ceiling. People leave because of people, right? Because of the way in which they are treated and in the way in which they see whether or not they are creating a sense of value, right? People want to show up because to a particular role because they want to make a difference, especially in the nonprofit. That is, so ingrained in people that are, for the most part, come to organizations because they are very service oriented. And so being met with an opportunity to be heard, to feel like, and to know that they belong and to feel that they're making a difference, those are incredibly tangibly ways, meaningful ways in which a healthy culture is born.
I 100% agree. 100%. Those are all free, easy ways. I think, what is the quote is it from Maya Angelou that says people won't forget how you make them feel?
That's right. People may forget
and that's what it all comes down to.
That's right.
Yeah.
Dr. Maya Angelou has so many beautiful quotes, but she says, people may forget what you tell them, but they never will forget how you make them feel. And that's it, right? And I hear the rhetoric and I understand how busy main leaders, executive directors, and managers are because of the number of hats that they're wearing. But there's nothing more meaningful to know that they are surrounding themselves with people who are just as caring, who are just as committed to the mission, and who are there to build together, right? And so taking 5 minutes to say, hey, that contribution that you did yesterday with this particular project, wow, and to do that publicly, right? I think that we often hear, my manager that she showed me that she actually noticed that I thought she was so busy doing this other thing, and then she praised me with that meant the world to me. And then we hear the opposite when we're doing perhaps interviews with folks that have left. Often we hear, well, I said that I needed more money, but in reality, I've never been respected. My manager really has never paid attention to no matter how many things or how far I went or how above and beyond, not even a thank you. Those things are in real time what we hear.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been there, done that completely.
Yes.
So it's all about how you make them feel, folks.
Yes.
So for those that don't have an HR department, do you know of any good resources or tools that they can lean on?
Yeah. So there's a wonderful national organization that, the membership is not very expensive, and they will have an arsenal of great resources. So that's the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM. There's actually a local chapter or local chapters. There's Dallas HR, there's Fort Worth HR, Mid-Cities HR, also North Texas HR. And so those organizations are really the hub for HR professionals that anyone can tap into for a good database of resources. They can also perhaps find specific HR consultants who may be available. We love the fact that for a lot of our clients, they may not necessarily want to hire a full-time HR person, but they may lean on organizations like mine, where they can come to us for a specific need. We provide the guidance, and then they can run with that, right? So it's not even some of our clients hire us ongoing, but a lot of them is just like, hey, I just need to have, there's this situation unfolding, what do I do, right? And so having some expertise in that regard, I think is great. What I would suggest is to stay away from the internet and stay away from AI, because we're just not there where AI can really give a sound approach, a reliable approach to people issues. And we see this all the time. In fact, we had a client that brought us their handbook and said, I had AI create this draft of my handbook, but I realized that I don't know how to, check and balance what it's telling me. Can you please review it? And actually, it was a good starting point, but we did have to make quite a few revisions, both to make it personalized and to make it compliant. So I would just, caution to those who are going straight to AI for answers on complex HR issues or compliance guidance, that I would, be very, very cautious with leaning on, to that resource.
Absolutely. I always refer people and say, hey, no, you need to get an HR professional. Like, I can come up with a template, but you need a lawyer and you need an HR professional to review this and make sure it's in compliance, that there's not something else that they know of that would be applicable to your particular organization or this particular situation. So, yeah. Can employees reach out to you as well, or do you only work for the organization itself?
So we set basically the engagement with the organization, but we are a referral source to the employees and to the leadership. In fact, that has been a very valuable way in which organizations have avoided an employee going directly to a regulatory agency like Texas Workforce Commission or the EEOC, because they don't have anywhere else to go. So we are that buffer that employees may come to us to say, hey, I'm worried because I'm dealing with the situation. So we're able to assess if there is need to escalate, then we will escalate and basically be in a position where we're understanding the experience by the employee, but also looking at how we can bring a balanced approach to defend the organization, right? And so many of our clients hire us for the advice that leaders can gain from us, but also just in case an employee had an issue, they will have a place to go to.
Gotcha. Okay, so if somebody's listening right now and they're listening to all this and they're like, "Ooh, we have work to do," what's the first step that you'd recommend they take? What's the first thing they should look at?
I think that the organizations that are out there supporting their worthy missions, they know their business very well. They know their pain points. They know what is going well, what are the areas where improvement may be needed. I caution those who may shoot themselves in the foot thinking that there's really nothing from an employee standpoint that can be improved, because there's always something, and there's always an opportunity for them to be proactive as to how they prepare themselves for when, again, not if, but when. So, starting with some basic tenets, such as, do we have a job description for the employees that we have? Do we know how we're classifying our employees? I think that the classification is one of the areas that is more high scrutiny. And so, that payday law and wage and hour, those are more sensitive because the IRS and the DOL, the Department of Labor, they have their hands on that, because if you're not paying someone correctly, you may not be paying the correct taxes, and therefore the IRS will want to get involved, right? And so classifications are important. So making sure that you understand how, what are the expectations for the role. So some basic job descriptions as well as the classifications, employee versus contractor, exempt versus non-exempt. I think that those are some of the areas, again, that will be important to have a good grasp on. A basic number of policies, like we talked about, right? That if you have more than 3 employees, especially if you have 5, you more than likely have to have a list of good policies that you can then, share with your employees. And then ultimately have a ongoing, set of expectations as to how you're going to manage performance. And again, talk about what is going well, what may not be going well. Beyond that, I think that those are like the main basic areas that I would suggest any employer to have in order for them to have a sense of a foundational piece on how the employees can make both a meaningful contribution as well as to be, how they're going to be measured against their performance.
Love that. Love that. Well, before we leave, is there anything else that you feel like we need to tell anybody listening to this right now? Like if there's a key piece that you're like, no, please go do this right now. Let me know. Speak out now.
Yes. Well, I think that I like to call it forcing the pause. So allow yourself to force the pause to review what is the organization doing from an employee standpoint, right? It's easy to go, right? And so outside of the operational and the financial and the overall piece of mission-driven purpose that you are all delivering, it's important to force a pause and realize how many employees do we have? Are we creating a good, strong culture? Do I have an expert ally that I can rely on, that I can call upon when things may bubble up, that I do not want to shoot myself in the foot thinking that I know it all from an HR compliance standpoint and unintentionally create a sense of liability for the organization that could be a lot more expensive than that phone call that I could make that expert.
Absolutely. I don't know if you are on TikTok, but I am obsessed right now with listening to our viewing the episodes from Aunt Bree on TikTok, who is a fractional HR person. Have you seen these?
I have not.
They're
I've heard her,
fantastic.
but I haven't been on TikTok, but I know of Embry. Yes.
She is fantastic. I've learned so many ways to say things better just listening to how she approaches things with people. But wow, I mean, there are some things that people do that I would have never guessed that they would do. And I feel like that's kind of an education listening to her, so I can prepare, make sure that I train my managers to not do these things. Or if an employee does X, I should watch out for Y.
Absolutely.
Very entertaining.
It's and within my team, so many times we scratch our heads and say, goodness, I think that I have literally seen it all because of X situation that happened. Just to go on and, in the next week, we'll say, okay, no, this is actually it. This is, I have seen it all.
Right.
So it's a constant thing, right? To add to that, I will say that something really critical, or the other piece that is critical as we discuss, is make sure that your managers are empowered to withstand and to go through the complexity of the people issues that can come up. I would say that especially after COVID, we have seen an enormous amount of need of just understanding that we're all going through something, right? And so the level of situations that come up because of, the amount of mental health needs of, just the stress, the burnout, all of those big important pieces that come along with running a nonprofit organization show up in ways that bring major challenges. So empowering your employees, being a leader that understands that, we're all managing all of these very stressful situations with compassion and respect, while also holding the boundary steady of what the expectations are. That's that's the sweet spot that I believe
Yeah.
makes a culture thrive.
Absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree. Okay, so Gabriela, you have a free resource for people. I want you to tell them all about it.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, so we developed on our website a specific area where folks who come in and visit the website, we have a leadership development toolkit. And that really provides managers with a lot of really good guidance. There's a lot of really strong templates there that they can just utilize and put into practice in real time when they're dealing with employee situations. And so on my website, under resources, there is a link for HR tools and templates that they can access this information. Usually they'll be asked to put in, some basic detail, and then they will have full access. They can download these documents and then they can put it into use. So
Okay.
in addition to that, I also there's a few others that are about like doing a full audit, and then there's one that is specifically on employee performance.
Love this. So give your website address real quick so people know to go to Tools and Templates at what website address?
It's at pprhr.com.
Perfect. Awesome. I think we should end it there. This was fabulous. Thank you so much, Gabriela. Hopefully people will respond to this with questions, and maybe we can do a question and answer episode. I think that would be super fun. But thank you so much. I really appreciate the conversation, and I think this is going to be great.
It was such a treat, Wendy. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you to your audience. I look forward to hopefully some FAQs together.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right, guys, you heard it. You need to go into the Facebook group, or you need to email me your HR questions so we can get that up and we can do another episode with Gabriela. Until next time. Thanks for listening to the Nonprofit Nook. We're building better nonprofits together. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with other nonprofit leaders who need support. Follow the Nonprofit Nook on social media and sign up for our email list for extra tips and updates. You can also visit thenonprofitnook.com to see the show notes and leave a comment telling me what topics you want next. Your feedback shapes the show. See you next time.